start.
Good afternoon, everyone in the room and online. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Gio Espinosa, and I'm the Assistant Director for the Product Forms and Compliance Division. I am participating today on behalf of Lori Munn. Welcome to the Resiliency and Mitigation Council meeting today, May 13th. At this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order and go over general meeting logistics. This meeting is being broadcast online and is being recorded. The recording associated meeting materials will be posted on the council's webpage. Comments in the chat will not be recorded. For council members online, please use the hand raise feature in order to speak. Except for public comment periods, only council members online will be able to unmute themselves and turn on their camera. If public comments are taken, each speaker's time will be limited to provide everyone who wishes to comment the opportunity to do so. To comment, fill out a speaking slip that's located in the front of the room or the Google form if you are online. Carrie, can we go with attendance, please?
Yes. Randy Chevalier.
I'll take a look.
He was a contributor.
Just go ahead. I'll see.
Okay. Laura Curtis.
She's here.
Carmine DeBonis.
Here.
Terry Edwards. Jacob Emnen.
Here.
Michael Newman. Jake Rhodes.
I'm here.
Tom Savage.
I'm right here.
Tom Torres.
Daniel Valenzuela here for Director Torres.
And going back to Randy Chevalier.
He is not going to be on. He messaged me a minute ago.
Thank you. And Terry Edwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. And unless someone has any questions regarding the general meeting logistics, I'd like to proceed with our first presentation as we have a busy afternoon. Our first presenter will be Juliana, and I'll have her introduce herself.
Great. So good afternoon, and thank you for inviting Verisk to present to the Arizona Resiliency and Mitigation Council. My name is Juliana Anastasados, and I'm the Vice President of Wildfire at Verisk, which means I'm responsible for Verisk's overall wildfire risk assessment and management business strategy. And in this role, I also serve as a public-facing spokesperson to educate key stakeholders like yourselves about how Verisk addresses wildfire risk assessment and management for our clients. And I'm joined today by Dr. Julia Borman, who leads Verisk's Regulatory and Rating Agency Client Services team within the Extreme Event Solutions business unit. For your purposes today, suffice it to say, she's here as a subject matter expert to present to you on our wildfire catastrophe model. Next slide. Our goal here today is to provide you with an understanding of two tools that Verisk has developed to assist our clients with wildfire risk assessment. Now, you may hear them referred to as solutions, tools, or most commonly as models. But as you can see here, there are myriad references for this term model, and these are some of them. This is a non-exhaustive list of the types of models that insurers might use for various purposes in managing their business. And we're not going to talk about all of these different types of models, which are built differently, function differently, they use different kinds of inputs and provide different sorts of outputs They're used for different purposes, and attempting to group all of these different types of models together for insurance regulatory purposes can be quite a challenge. Next slide, please. So it's always a crucial threshold question when you're talking about models to understand what type of model that we're talking about. And for today, we're only going to talk about these two that are highlighted in gray, risk scoring models and catastrophe models. Next slide, please. Specifically, these are Verisk's wildfire risk scoring model, known as Fireline, and Verisk's wildfire catastrophe model. We call it informally a CAP model. More formally, it's the Verisk wildfire model for the United States. And I'm going to give you the details about Fireline. Julia will share the CAP model with you. Next slide, please. I want to first, wow, these colors are really different. I want to first level set on who Verisk is. So we are a leading strategic data analytics and technology partner to the global insurance industry. Our tools empower our clients to strengthen their operating efficiency, improve insurance underwriting and claims outcomes, combat fraud, and make informed decisions about global risks, including climate change, extreme events like wildfire and hurricane, political topics, and ESG issues. Our clients include insurers, reinsurers, as well as agents, brokers, self-insured businesses, risk managers, financial services firms, regulators, and various governmental agencies. We are also very proud to support local communities and the fire service with our ISO Public Protection Classification, or PPC program, which some of you may have heard about. We understand that you may be interested in knowing why a company like Verisk might be viewed as an authority in assessing and measuring the wildfire risk for the insurance industry at large. And so I'll start with pointing out the basis for the credibility behind our tools. Verisk's Extreme Event Solutions, where these models are developed, houses over 150 scientists, with about 90 of them holding PhDs in multiple disciplines. And all of these scientists contribute to the creation of our models on some level, with our wildfire team having specific scientific expertise in the disciplines relevant to wildfire, like climatology, remote sensing, meteorology, vegetation and crop science, and engineering, to name a few. These are researchers by trade and training, and they are continuously studying and collaborating both formally and informally with academic institutions, governmental agencies, organizations like the IBHS, where two of our researchers serve on their research council. We also participate in the Climate Council. And to serve our clients, we draw upon our vast experience in data management and our expertise in predictive modeling. It's worth noting that beyond wildfire, Verisk has a long history of evaluating risk from many perils, including earthquake, hurricane, and flood, for example. Next slide. But for wildfire specifically, these are some of the issues that are at the forefront of our clients' minds as they grapple with how to understand, price, and assess risk from this peril. And so as a result, these are the considerations that our researchers keep in mind as they develop and continually enhance our models. Next slide, please. So we're going to start with Fireline. This is our property level risk assessment tool. It's part of our location suite of products. It helps us characterize the wildfire hazard at the address level. This tool gives carriers insights into both the frequency and the severity of wildfire loss, because what we've seen with this particular peril is that frequency is closely tied to severity, because in most cases, unfortunately, homes that are impacted by a wildfire suffer a total loss. Now, you might find it interesting that Fireline was originally created in the 90s following the Oakland Hills fire, in response to some of our carrier customer requests for a tool that would help them understand wildfire risk specifically better. Prior to that time, the available tools that they had at their disposal were based on antiquated mapping or zoning. They were simply not responsive to the growth, and they didn't have the necessary granularity or, frankly, the wildfire science supporting them. Next slide, please. Fireline's scoring system incorporates the well-studied and well-known factors identified by the NFPA and other wildfire practitioners and scientists and scholars as being the most critical for evaluating the wildfire hazard. And this includes vegetative fuels, topography or slope, and finally road access. And I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about each of those factors in a moment, but these are the basic factors that we use to evaluate the wildfire hazard. Next slide, please. I've already mentioned the deep bench of scientific experts that we have at Verisk. I'm just going to point out that that breadth of expertise undergirds Fireline specifically from its original development in the 1990s and continuing to today with ongoing maintenance and enhancements made to the tool. And so in addition to the PhD scientists who developed the tool, we consulted with insurance industry experts, computer scientists, and community fire professionals. We've also consulted with state and local wildland fire experts, including state fire marshals and departments of forestry. Fireline, as you can see on the right, it provides a score between 0 and 30, which assists carriers in understanding the relative risk that a particular structure will be damaged by a wildfire. Next slide, please. As I noted earlier, the score is made up of the 3 critical risk factors at the property or in its vicinity, which we have shown provides the most accurate measure of the overall risk. And these include fuels in the surrounding area, the slope or the topography, and the road access. Now, for purposes of the score, the fuels analysis is by far the most important factor, and that's because fuels are actually the most important factor for an actual wildfire risk. Using our proprietary algorithm that analyzes high-quality multispectral satellite imagery, we consider what the fuels consist of, what their moisture content is, how combustible they are, and how they're distributed. And we look at this both immediately surrounding the property as well as further out to a quarter mile. It's a sophisticated analysis that, while developed many years ago and ground truth by the scientists who created it, has been enhanced and updated over the years to account for advances in technology and the changing climate. It's also really important to analyze how that vegetation is changing over time. And so we update our fuels analysis on an annual basis or when we become aware of a major change to the composition of the fuels, perhaps as a result of a wildfire or a prescriptive burn or development into the wildland-urban interface. The second factor is based on the terrain or the topography, and it's referred to in the Fireline solution as slope. We know that slope at a property can have a significant impact on the risk. It accounts for how fast the fire spreads, what the flame length might be, and also the impact of the slope can be influenced by winds, especially in certain areas of the state. And slope is a factor that's easily verified. It really doesn't change once it's established. The third factor I mentioned was road access, and this is the final factor considered in creating the score, as we know that a home that's on a dead-end street, for example, that may be inaccessible or difficult to access by fire protection professionals is at greater risk than a home with easy access by firefighters. So road access is only applicable to dead-end streets. All other streets get a 0 for that factor, but there are considerations that we look at on that dead-end street as well, like the fuels along the road, how long the street is, how wide it might be, which can also impact its accessibility. And so that's how the base fire hazard score is created. But with the Fireline report, we also provide other data elements for insurance carriers to consider. And so, for example, we also flag areas that are adjacent to, but not in the direct path of a high wildland fire risk area, because we know they'll have exposure to smoke and ash damage, as well as a risk of urban conflagration, which we've seen plenty of in the past few years, and especially recently in the Southern California fires. We call those areas special hazard zones. I'm going to show you an example of that shortly. In the last couple of years, we've enhanced the basic hazard score, and you can see this on the right, to reflect mitigation actions that might be taken by a property owner, either in hardening the structure or in reducing the surrounding vegetative fuels and other combustible material located near the structure. And so this current version of Fireline allows users to input mitigation features, such as those that are called out by IBHS's Wildfire Prepared Home, or other parcel level mitigations like defensible space, or recognition as an NFPA Firewise community, for example. And the presence of these mitigations will reduce the score, potentially making the structure more acceptable to insurance carriers who are assessing the risk and deciding whether to insure a given property. Importantly, all of these data are updated on a regular cadence using comprehensive data sources, including Landsat, multispectral satellite imagery, aerial imagery, weather and climate data, road networks, NFPA Firewise community information. And as for that, through our expanded partnership with NFPA, we get that data directly from NFPA so that we can actually pre-fill the field if a particular property is part of an NFPA Firewise community. We can also do that with the International Association of Fire Chiefs Ready, Set, Go program or other state-specific community mitigation designations, which might be available in other Western states. Our current most up-to-date version of Fireline has been in the market for over 2 years. It's been formally reviewed by the Departments of Insurance in California, Nevada, Colorado, and Tennessee. Next slide, please. So Verisk is wholeheartedly committed to promoting resiliency and mitigation. And in fact, Our corporate purpose is to work together to build global resilience for individuals, communities, and businesses. And we take that proclamation seriously, as demonstrated by our partnerships with organizations like NFPA and IAFC. And as I mentioned previously, we have 2 researchers that serve on IBHS's Research Council, and we were a founding partner of IBHS's South Carolina Research Facility. Next slide. The image on the left here is an example of our high-quality aerial imagery that is also used in the Fireline tool to detect the presence and location of trees and tree overhang, as well as the presence of other fire hazards that might be located within 5 or 10 feet of the structure. And these will impact the survivability of the structure. And so we use this imagery. It has a 7.5 centimeter resolution, and it's updated biannually in communities over 50,000. And we pre-fill some of the mitigation features that might reduce the hazard score. Significantly, it's important to note that we have long had in place a review process whereby, should a homeowner believe that their score is inaccurate or out of date, they can make a request through their carrier, who's our customer, to have the score reviewed and updated. Next slide. Now, while Fireline always provides a score and insights that are specific to an address or to a lat-long location, we have created this map using all of the Fireline scores generated in these 14 states where the tool is currently available for our annual wildfire risk reports. And I know that some of you may have seen those maps. But when the carriers are using our tool, they don't use a map. They actually get an address-specific score and a report with the granular insights about the structure that's located at that address. But this is sort of something people find interesting to see with a lot of the red. While there is a lot of red, that is often in areas where the wildlands are and not where you are seeing communities. Next slide. So the last slide that I wanted to share with you before turning it over to Julia is this one showing Fireline scores within the fire footprints in the recent Southern California Palisades and Wheaton fires. As you can see, most of the area in both of the fire footprints were scored by Fireline as either moderate or high to extreme wildfire risk. Those little beige areas, which is where many of the homes that were destroyed were located, were all flagged by Fireline as special hazard zones. I mentioned that earlier. So this is all information that Fireline users would have had prior to these fires. Our analysis after the fire showed that less than 10% of the properties within the fire footprint in the Palisades, for example, had even 5 feet of defensible space. And less than 0.5% had 30 feet or greater of defensible space. And so even though the majority of those properties had stucco exterior and clay tile roofs, non-combustible materials, many of them were still destroyed. And so the importance of the defensible space that I know you've heard about a lot cannot be overstated. We also concluded from a very high level that 80% of the buildings that survived were built with non-combustible materials like siding and roofs, while 80% of the buildings that were destroyed, these are the buildings that we surveyed. So Julie's going to talk a little bit more about that. We did send a team to survey the areas after the fires. And 80% of the buildings that were destroyed were built with combustible materials. And so again, it's just sort of confirmation of what we've seen and what has been demonstrated in the labs like IBHS's research facility about the importance of building resilient homes from the get-go. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Julia Borman, who's going to talk about our wildfire CAT model. Completely different tool altogether.
Completely different tool. So hi, everyone. I'm Julia Borman. I was one of our 150 researchers on the extreme event solution side, but then 4 years ago, I took over what we call our regulatory rating agency client services team. One of the major mandates for my team is that we bring catastrophe models to departments for education and also for model review and submission where there are formal submission processes. Obviously, wildfire has been a big part of my life for the past couple of years as a result of more departments being interested in catastrophe models, understanding them, and especially around the wildfire peril. So I'm going to be getting into that model. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so let's start with like why we need a CAT model, because they serve a particular purpose and they fill sort of a set need that catastrophes create, which is that we're talking about events that we don't have a lot of historical information for, and sometimes when we have historical information about a wildfire, we we don't necessarily have the same built environment under that historical footprint that's occurred. So when we're thinking about the actuarial rating process and wanting to have enough data to effectively understand the risk that that kind of catastrophe presents, in catastrophe rating, you don't necessarily have the experience that you want. And so catastrophe models are looking to fill in that experience with science and engineering understanding, to create a fuller set of understanding around like the potential that an event can have. So, and it allows you to do that over the current exposure, so the current built environment. So you can get a more accurate understanding of your risk. And also key is that models are supposed to capture potential losses before they occur, right? So the idea is that we're pricing with an understanding that there's potential for this event there. Next slide. This is the framework that we use across all of our perils. And what we do is we think about catastrophe modeling as these three separate modules. The first being about hazard, so how the peril develops. So when we talk about that in the context of wildfire, it's how do we understand how wildfire footprints develop, and within that footprint, the amount of intensity a fire has. We'll create what we call a stochastic catalog. This is like the hallmark of catastrophe models, where we generate 100,000 possible years of experience, all equally likely next year. So I'll get into that and what that looks like in a second. Then we take that information and we combine it with something that the user gives us, which we call their exposure data. So those are the locations that they have an interest in. So exposure data is, where are these properties? What kind of properties are they? Are they single family wood homes, one story, right? So that's coming in the exposure data. And it can also tell us about mitigation features. So I'll talk about that too. So we'll take our catalog, which is what we've modeled on our end. We'll think about where these locations are. So you can do one location, you can do an entire portfolio. And then the next step, which is engineering, is about how much damage from these stochastic fires are those properties going to incur. So in the engineering module, we're translating intensity against the exposure into an understanding of damage. So we talk a lot about damage ratios. So it's between 0 and 1, where 1 is where we consider it a total loss. Once we get out of the engineering module, we now have 100,000 years of experience for each of these properties. And then the financial component of the model translates that into a loss number for each one of those events. So now we're talking about an output that is 100,000 years of potential loss outcomes for an actuary to work with that allows them to create a better understanding of tail risk, probability of loss at certain levels. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this picture doesn't look great in this coloring, but it's cool. So I wanted to give an understanding of like what is in the stochastic catalog. So again, it's footprints, and within those footprints, it's an understanding of intensity. So this is a sample of what a stochastic fire might look like. What we'll do is we will have the computer ignite a fire, and then that fire will grow to a certain size. And it will take into account the types of fuels that are there, the kind of wind that it is experiencing, the time of year, the location, the built environment. It'll take into account suppression, and it will create these footprints that we can work with. Now, within a given event year, so we're modeling across the 13 Western states. And so within these footprints, right, we can have multiple fires going at the same time within a stochastic year across different parts of our domain. And so at the end of it, though, what we're left with are 70 million fires. So we've got 70 million of effectively these footprints to look at. Next slide, please. Okay, I knew that quite a few people on this call would be interested in understanding how we consider suppression. We do consider suppression as a part of our modeling, but of course suppression is a factor of many things. So some of the things that we consider are population density, the wind, fuel moisture, fire penetration, construction types, and fire size. So again, I'm showing you these two footprints. On the left, what you're seeing is what we're calling sort of the lower suppression mechanism. So you can think about this, if this is the exact same computer simulation with the exception of maybe one fire has higher wind that can push this into urban areas, then on the left, the fire does in fact spread into an urban area. You can see that there are pockets of suppression that are happening within there, but the fire can spread in. If you simulate the same fire, but you were potentially to lower the wind, right, then we would, in our modeling, right, think about the fact that, okay, the wind is lower, we can likely suppress it in these urban areas, right? And then the fire might spread south. So you can see the footprints are slightly different. So that's what these computer simulations are looking to do and considering as a part of how we create these. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, sticking with talking about mitigation, because Juliana also talked about this and what we can consider in the model. So as a part of the exposure data that a user puts into our model, one of the things they can do is they can specify what we call secondary risk characteristics. So that's the CAT modeling jargon for mitigation features. So there are a total of 19 secondary risk characteristics that you can put into our model. But within those, you can model things like the IPHS, wildfire protected home, both base and plus designations. There are, of course, other combinations of these factors that can be modeled, and different sort of regulations exist around that in different states. And so those kinds of things can be modeled with the Verisk model. So I'm going to point out just a couple of them, but like, what is your roof cover and what is its fire rating is in there? What kind of wall siding do you have? What is its fire rating? What kind of defensible space do you have? Not on here is whether or not you're a firewise community. You can also put that one in. So as you can see, there are quite a few mitigations that can come through the model. When you input these secondary risk characteristics on a particular property, what it does is in the engineering module, it can refine the view of risk for the locations that you're running through, okay? So if you run a location and you have no understanding of secondary risk characteristics, the model is thinking about what it calls its unknown for that occupancy, construction, class type. When you update your exposure data and then you add in, okay, these are all firewise, or I know what the gutters are, I know if this has a deck, or this is how much defensible space is at this particular property. And again, this can be a location, right? So single location. Then what it does is it goes, okay, compared to the unknown, right? If you have defensible space, that should lower your vulnerability to that, and it creates the reduction in the model. So one of the use cases for CAT models is to understand what mitigation can do for your portfolio by toggling these on and off. Next slide. So I know Juliana talked about fire line in the context of the LA wildfires. I'm going to talk about the CAT model. So one of the things I said a CAT model needs to do is it needs to understand the potential for losses before they occur. LA is a recent set of wildfires that we can look at to understand whether or not the model sees that level of hazard. So the way to read these maps is that when you have deeper reds as opposed to yellows, deeper reds means that the model understands that there is wildfire risk in these areas. The blue outlines are fire footprints. On the bottom, I have Eaton and Bridge. On the top, Palisades seems to have jumped in the formatting, but Palisades is on the bottom right. The top image next to it is Franklin. Kenneth is up at the top. Notably, Kenneth and Franklin both encroach on the Woolsey fire footprint back from 2018. So one of the questions we get a lot in the CAT modeling space is whether or not places that have experienced wildfires can experience future wildfires. The answer is yes. That kind of risk potential can still persist in these areas. And the model does a good job of capturing that. So let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that we do routinely after there are large catastrophic events to, as much as we're able to, is we go in and we survey for damage understanding. So we look for a couple of things when we go in for different perils, but traditionally it's about what is allowing a structure to withstand a particular peril, and also if there are commonalities in what could not, what the peril could overcome. So we surveyed over 100 properties. Juliana was part of that team along with a couple of our researchers. And you can see that we went through the Palisades and fire footprints and looked at properties there. One of the other things that we were surveying for in this particular survey was an understanding of spread mechanisms, right, in urban conflagration. Let's go to the, I think that's it. Let's go to the next slide. So I wanted to point out, because I know Juliana touched a little bit on our experience and the scientific bench that we have, but our CAB models have been well accepted across different perils for a long time. We have Verisk has the longest running hurricane wind acceptance in Florida. We've taken this wildfire model and had it approved in Nevada, and it's under review with California. So just an understanding that, you know, we take our science very seriously, and we're also happy to show it to folks and have them review it. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so I just want to end on what carriers are considering when they're using these tools, because we, across both types of modeling, we get that question in terms of how do they get used by an insurer and like what is the purpose of them. So again, we have two tools here that we're talking about, the risk scoring tool and the catastrophe modeling tool. Catastrophe modeling tool can be used for quite a few things, but traditionally you see it mostly in portfolio optimization and actuarial pricing, getting this, working with the catastrophe load. It does also get used for things like claims. So in the when events are happening and there's real-time sort of analysis that's going on, people will use catastrophe models to understand sort of where the potential risk is, where they have exposure. CAT models get used a lot for reinsurance structuring as well, understanding risk across all of the perils and in a portfolio. The risk scoring tool sits in the underwriting portion of Verisk, and it is primarily geared at the underwriting, like selection and pricing at the point of sale component. You can use the CAT model for that too, but the risk scoring tools tend to be pretty prevalent there as opposed to CAT models. They can both be used for that. And with that, I mean, we're happy to take questions if you have it, if we have time.
Thank you, Dr. Borman and Juliana. I'm going to open it up to the council members online first. Does anybody have any questions for our presenters? Hearing none. How about here in the room?
Yeah, question. So it sounds like, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So it sounds like the product that you're providing is predominantly used by insurance companies to determine what their risk is in a given area. Is that the Reader's Digest version?
The risk scoring tool is heavily insurer. The CAT model is insurers and reinsurers are most of our clientele.
Okay. So when you do, and I don't know if this is something that you share, because I know in one of the slides you talk about the parcel level assessments that you do where, you know, I think you're looking at things like, you know, tree overhang or maybe excess storage or just determining the general risk for that property. And I'm assuming that insurance companies are using that to determine what premiums they're going to charge the property owners. Is any of that data shared with the property owner so they can know how you are assessing their property?
Do you want to do that first?
Yeah. So our customers are the insurers, and there are some states where the insurers are required by regulation or statute to share that information with their customers. And so they will pass it through if they're there's definitely an interest in transparency so that consumers, keeping in mind, we're insurance consumers also, so we can empathize with wanting to know those things. So, and they will pass that on, and they can. I mean, it's certainly available for them to do that. We don't actually monitor or control or even track exactly how our customers do those things, but it's available for them to do that if they want to, and or if they need.
So they're not obligated unless they live in or they're in a state that they're
That requires it,
obligated.
right. But it's available for them to do that. It's not insurmountable.
Okay, all right. And the reason why I ask is, my association, we represent the elected officials that they're hearing from their constituents about like, hey, we've done all the, we provided that defensible space. We're honoring the best practices to reduce our wildfire risk. And it's just not being acknowledged by the insurance companies. I'm not seeing a reduction in my rates, or I'm getting a non-renewal. So I'm just curious how, if this information is made available to the insurance companies, does that trickle down to the property owner? Sounds like it's on a case-by-case basis.
It is, yeah. So we're a business-to-business company, so we don't talk directly to the insurance consumers, but we're there to help our customers when they need to do that with their customers, who would be the insurance consumers or the policyholders. So it's available. We hear all of those same sort of concerns, and it's really up to each individual carrier to make the determination what they do with the data, but those data points are all available.
Thank you.
You had a question?
I have a quick question. So if I understood the presentation correctly, specifically for the fire line side, right? You guys are updating all of these different factors in population clusters of over 50,000 quite regularly. And that includes things like tree overhang and building materials. And it's like, as Tom was kind of saying, on a parcel by parcel level, that seems like a humongous amount of data to have to process. And 150 people, I guess I'm not an expert. Every single city of 50,000 or more, and every single property and the trees. So I wondered, is there any light you can shed on how that data gets processed? Is it all people checking and looking at the overhangs in every single parcel? Because that seems
No. I mean, so the aerial imagery is the one that what I was referring to that gets updated biannually if it's over 50,000. And so that's the aerial imagery that has 7.5 centimeters of resolution. And there is AI involved in analyzing that. But it's also, there's always a human in the loop. And so we do ground truth and we do analyze and, make sure that it's updated appropriately. And then there's always the ability for the consumer to ask for a review if they think that there's an error.
And does that happen? They'd have to go through their insurer to do that.
That's right.
Correct? And does that happen very often?
So I can't remember exactly how many, I think it was last year we had for Fireline, there were something like 4,000 requests, which was more than I expected. But we have a very, very small percentage of scores that actually get changed. And it's generally has more to do with potentially the geolocation being off. But but the scoring tool, even once we can get photographic evidence, or we can get somebody who's gone and inspected and from the insurance carrier, and maybe they'll look at that. And the score is actually the change rate is minuscule. I can't remember what the percentage was, but it's very accurate to begin with. The other way that it might change is if the fuels in particular have changed. So that's one thing where if there was a big fuels mitigation project that happened, it could reduce the fuels. And so that would be something that might end up changing.
Makes sense. I have one more.
Okay.
So having been on this committee, I've heard the name bearer risk a lot.
Uh-huh.
Are there a substantial number of other products like this, or are you guys and are there has any public entity tried to make something like this?
So we have a number of competitors, different ones that are cat model competitors and different ones that are Fireline competitors. We're one of only 2 companies that have both of those tools. Actually, I think maybe 3 now. There was an acquisition recently, but there are competitors in each of those fields. But I'm not aware of a public that's used for insurance purposes. And that's one of the things that I think an important thing to recognize is that using it for insurance purposes, especially the catastrophe model and the outputs that the catastrophe model creates are very unique to insurance. It's not something that is easily undertaken.
Could you explain that a little bit?
I mean, so what she's alluding to is that, so like I mentioned, we create all of these different stochastic binders, and then for each of those, you're getting loss outcomes across what we call your book of business if you're the insurer. That means that, you know, just take one location and you run it through the model, you're getting tens of thousands of loss results to look at. So you're, you know, with the idea in mind that you as the user can understand like what your thresholds are going to be, right, based on sort of the appetite of risk for that particular company. There are different sort of key outputs, as we like to put them. So we'll hear average annual loss thrown a lot around in the cat modeling world, AAL for short. So, right, the AAL is if you looked at all of the losses that came out of our model for that location, used to be average of them, right? But it is a substantial amount of data to work with in itself, right? And then that part of the equation is left with the insurer, right? Because depending on their appetite for different kinds of risk, right, they'll have different ways that they want to look at those outputs and process them and use them. So our job is to help them get there, right? But then it's up to them to implement them as a part of their rating plan and understanding of, you know, how they want to grow their portfolio or something like that.
And so while the hazard module, and it has the spreads, and she showed you those photos, and you'll see a lot of spread models out there. There's, you know, fire services have spread models and so, but the CAT model takes it to the next step of the engineering module, where you have to know about actually what the structures are that the insurance carrier is insuring, and then it does the financial piece of it. And so the spread model is only one piece of it. It's an important piece, but the ultimate output that the carriers care about really is, what's my losses? What are my losses going to be? What is the probability that I'm going to experience a certain level of loss, and how do I prepare myself for that financially? And so that's the important part, is to make sure that they have the right amount of reserves, the right amount of reinsurance, so that they're there and that they're solvent, and that they can actually cover the claims. And so these tools are intended to assist a robust market and allow insurance carriers to have, you know, precise ability to assess the risk, measure how much it's going to be, and instead of painting with some broad brush just looking at a hazard map, they are actually having these very targeted, granular analyses of these properties so that they can prepare and be and have a robust insurance market. That's what helps that.
Said one last one. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, get in there.
So, you know, you talk about being business to business. So we're not kind of there, and for good reason, right? There's a lot of very complex things that go into it. And so someone like me just trying to figure out something for my house wouldn't necessarily get everything I needed from that or know how to interpret it. And I imagine that's probably the same for like local governments. Is there like a local government kind of portion of this, or is it just to insurers?
The tools are designed with the insurers and the reinsurers in mind. I mean, that is the core audience.
And you had talked a little bit, I was just interested in the interaction with California and Nevada, and you talked about how you kind of went through a process with them. Could you talk a little bit about what that process is like?
Yeah, sure. So in Nevada, the actuarial team there perform reviews of models that come to the department. And so so our wildfire model has been in the market since 2006 in some form. And it's grown over time. And so Nevada actually reviewed the previous version of this model as well. And now we re-released with updates in June of 2024. And so they undertook that for review as well. So that involves us doing presentations like this. I mean, they understand CAT models within that department, so we get into the weeds with them on how we're bringing things together. Because it was a update review, we focused on what was different than the last thing that they had looked at. We talk about, how the loss outcomes come to be. And also, I mean, we focused a lot, the conversations on mitigation have been really prevalent, I think, in this space for many years. We talked a lot about mitigation, how it works, the user interaction component with like how exposure data gets fed into the model and how valuable good exposure data can be. So, I mean, it involves us handing over. We also let them review what we call our model documentation, which is something that regulators also have access to through the NAIC CAP Modeling Center of Excellence. I know they're also online, but they do keep some of our documentation on a separate portal for regulators that you can look at. And so Nevada also reviewed that. We went in person. We did like a full day with them talking about details about the model. California's process is new, so we're doing that now with them. That is a series of meetings and also handing over documentation, and so that's currently underway.
Now I'll brag a little bit about Julia. Last Friday, she did a public presentation in California that they're going to make it available publicly. The California Department is. That was a pretty robust presentation about the catastrophe model that hopefully, I mean, if we get a link to it, we'll share
it around
so that if you wanted to watch it, because it was an excellent presentation.
Thanks. Does any other council member in the room have a question? Okay.
Thanks for having us.
Dr.
Thank
Foreman,
you.
Juliana, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for your presentation. Next, we're going to be hearing from Milliman, and I believe Taylor, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Taylor Munch. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Great. You could go ahead on to my first slide and I'll introduce myself. Great. So I'm an associate actuary at Milliman, which is a global actuarial consulting firm. We offer a variety of solutions and services specialized in both risk and insurance. The practice I work for in San Francisco has a focus on personal insurance risk, which largely is homeowners insurance with a specialty in catastrophic risk management. And in the last few years, we've really grown in the realm of work for wildfire risk. So I'm really thankful to be here today to be able to share some insight on wildfire modeling and mitigation and some of our related work efforts around it, as well as be able to connect with all of you on aligning ideas. You could go ahead to the next slide. So I'm going to do kind of a high-level big picture overview on models and sustainable insurance, just hit back on a few of those key points that Juliana and Julia already addressed. And then I'm going to dive into some of the Milliman solutions surrounding those. So next slide. You could advance one more. There should be a couple graphics. There you go. If you click one more time, awesome. So as we start to think about community and mitigation and modeling from an insurance standpoint, there's one key goal that we're all trying to achieve here, which is widely available, reliable insurance that consumers can afford. So if I break that down into three pieces, we're going to talk about availability, affordability, and reliability. So availability comes based on insurers' ability to manage and measure the risk. To do so, wildfire CAT models and risk scores like Verisk Fireline and their CAT model that they just introduced are essential for insurers to be able to understand the risk. But as you've heard, wildfires are pretty difficult to model, and they might actually be the least understood peril in homeowners insurance. I'll add a little bit more to that in just a minute. But this makes insurers a little less confident in model predictions and thus more conservative with their capacity allocation, underwriting, and pricing. It's kind of like making a bet when you don't really know the odds. Thus, the availability issue isn't just because the risk is high, but also just that we don't have as thorough of an understanding of the risk. So the second component is affordability. Insurers must be able to charge prices that actually reflect the cost of the risk transfer. But if we allow insurers to do that, charge risk-based premiums, then how can we achieve affordability? The only sustainable answer to that is to actually reduce the risk itself and let that reduce the premiums. And the third portion is reliability. And so if insurers could get comfortable enough to write policies and do so at an affordable price, then how can consumers trust that insurance is actually reliable? What if a large, horrible wildfire happens? How can they be sure their claims are going to get paid out? Insurers need to be in a position to prove financial stability and reliability to gain consumer trust. Next slide, please. So let's talk about why wildfire is difficult to model and revisit some of those gaps in models that Vera's talked about. First, I want to make sure we're clear on the term wildfire is widely used, but what is really the concern here is urban conflagration. That's when wildfire spreads beyond its natural barriers into communities. And there's not enough urban conflagration events to have lots of data to calibrate models. Also, a lot of wildfires are human caused, which is definitely a more difficult thing to model compared to perils like hurricanes that are weather driven. A lot of the variables underneath wildfire change fast, including the climate, the way we develop structures into what we call the WUI, or wildland urban interface, and vegetation growth that's constantly changing. As Vera's talked about, there are also fire suppression activities that we have to update in models frequently and be sure that we're accounting for. And then unlike other perils in wildfires, the houses actually become the fuel. So in a hurricane, it might not matter if your neighbor's house gets hit, but in a wildfire, if your neighbor's house starts to burn, your house becomes more vulnerable because their home is creating additional fuel. Mitigating can definitely help reduce the risk and help us achieve affordability, but modeling the impact of mitigation is even harder than the current state. There are secondary modifiers like Vera's introduced. The need to estimate and the impact of these can vary based on different combinations of them being used and how they play a role in different locations. Much of the data needed to verify or evaluate those mitigations are not consistently available. And some risk models may not yet have a design to incorporate these type of things. Next slide, please. There are also a lot of misconceptions about models that need to be cleared up in order for them to be more regularly accepted. They've been coined as black boxes a lot, which means that a lot of individuals cannot access them or cannot understand the science or both. In an insurance regulatory context, typically modelers are willing to provide confidential IP if it can be protected, or opening to presenting and educating about the model. But because they are science-based, sometimes it's still not understandable to lay people. They've also been perceived as biased. This is the idea that insurers can manipulate the model settings and bias their answers to overstate premiums. And there are concerns that climate change has or has not been factored in. There's a concern that they increase premiums. But the alternative to using models is to use historical averages, which was an argument in the California Department of Insurance for years that actually backfired. So I'm going to show an example of that in just a minute. There's a misconception that they undermine regulatory oversight. Hurricane models have historically been used in Florida for several years, and it's definitely challenging in assessing these models. And models can disagree. So there are a lot of different models. that aren't all going to come up with the same answer, which actually is not a horrible thing because disagreement can point you to dig deeper and understand further why they might disagree. And proper model testing procedures can also help determine which models are doing good and which ones might need improvement. And the reality is that the alternative isn't as good. So on the next slide, we have a graph for a report that Milliman put together using California data that shows the difference in coming up with a premium using historical experience, so like a historical average, and the output of a catastrophe model. So the graph on the left shows wildfire average rates for a book of business that's growing in the WUI. And in this graph, you could see the CAT model indication shows a smooth upward increase in the average wildfire rate, with the total increases about 0.2% annually over time. The historical experience indication shows rate decreases for most years through 2016, and then rates more than doubling between 2017 and 2019 when we saw fires such as the Camp Fire in Paradise. On the right, the graph shows wildfire average rates for a book of business that's shrinking in the WUI across the state, where the CAT model indication shows a smooth decrease in the average wildfire rate, with total rate decreasing about 0.5% annually over time, while the historical experience indication shows the rate decreases for most years through 2016 and then increasing 67% between 2017 and 2019. So this graph shows that using historical averages can essentially create random changes in the rate. Next slide, please. So we're left with some key questions. Why is wildfire risk so hard to measure? Why is measuring the impact of mitigation even more difficult? How do we better incentivize risk reduction and prepare communities to receive fire? And what will it take to close the gap between effective risk reduction actions by communities that are happening on the ground and the information that's visible and usable by insurers in pricing and underwriting, which I believe was what somebody was trying to get at in the audience question on the last presentation. So I'm excited to address that. Through several projects, we at Milliman have begun to try to address these questions, and I'm going to dive into that now. But first, just a key reminder that as we talk about this, mitigation, of course, is not all about insurance. If we don't mitigate, we could have more events like Paradise, Lahaina, Palisades over and over again. So we really need to focus on these actions because they save lives and property. Next slide, please. One more slide, please. Thank you. For the first things first, we have to understand what mitigation actions actually reduce wildfire risk, how to model them, and how to translate that model input into something that's meaningful. So I'd like to direct you to this report that was put together by the CAL FIRE Risk Modeling Advisory Work Group, which consisted of Milliman, CAL FIRE, and several others, and it addresses these ideas. It's been published to provide recommendations and enhance literacy around wildfire mitigation and the importance of modeling it. In the essence of time, I'm not going to dive deep into this, but would encourage you to read it. Next slide, please. So talking about home level mitigations that matter and what homeowners need to do is all great. And in a perfect world, we'd be able to educate everyone and get it all implemented. But in reality, we need to be mindful of the willingness and financial ability to complete this. There may be a more time-efficient, cost-efficient solution to mitigating risk at scale. At Milliman, with the expertise of our academic research and fire service partners, we've put together a framework for achieving risk reduction at scale. It consists of finding the most likely ignition areas, prioritizing specific location treatment, and using on-the-ground technology to inspect homes, modeling and extrapolating and aggregating those results. I'm going to go through each of these components now. So the next slide, please. So to first identify the most likely place a fire will enter a community or ignite. We've looked at the fire pathway modeling done by a company called Xyloplan. Xyloplan uses science, including wind patterns, historical data, and firefighting experience to determine the most likely path of fire. In these images on the screen, this is displayed by the orange lines. Given this knowledge, fire services can then recommend vegetation treatment in specific areas where the model estimates the fire is more likely to arrive. Having treatments that disrupt these pathways or slow or halt them will halt the entrance of fire to the community and give the fire suppression response more time. So those treatments are shown in those little blue polygons. Next slide, please. Vegetation treatment is a form of community level mitigation that could slow or stop a fire from entering the community in the first place. However, if it does enter, it becomes an urban conflagration. At that point, the houses become the fuel, and not having proper home level mitigation is the only way to slow the fire at that point and allow for a suppression response. So to identify and model home level mitigation, we've all addressed that that's a lot of data that needs to be collected. And the aerial view may be an option, but there's also some things that can't be seen from aerial view, like debris underneath decks, so further inspection might be needed. As a solution, we've seen a few startups start creating a homeowner-friendly app that can do inspections on the ground and capture this type of data. There's one that's listed here called Pyrezo, and they use a 360-degree camera approach. Next slide, please. To begin to quantify these benefits of vegetation treatment and home hardening, this data can be fed into catastrophe models and output average annual losses, or AALs. These represent the loss expected in 1 year on average, given several simulations of loss events. The example here shows the difference nicely by color on how these AALs can change with mitigation benefits. So on the left, we have a pre-mitigated scenario, and on the right, we have post-treatments, where the treatments are shown in pink. So on the right, you can see a lot more green colored AALs, implying they're lower AALs, compared to on the left, where you see yellow, orange, and red showing higher AALs or higher losses. Next slide, please. So given all this data and the output that comes from catastrophe models, we can also calculate some telling spatial variables that'll help us quantify risks, such as homes' distance to the wildland, the distance between homes, and the distance to a fire pathway, which was what I introduced that Xyloplan calculates. Having these type of variables can really show us where mitigation prioritization is best to be placed within a community. And so these images are color-coded to show those different variables. Next slide, please. Alongside mitigation, another key component to understanding risk reduction is understanding the fire suppression response. The most concerning type of fires are the fast wind-driven fires, in which the speed of the fire and the speed of a response to mitigate it are most important and a key to understanding. Alongside the Western Fire Chiefs Association, we've developed a WUI fire protection score, which measures the fire response based on equipment availability, personnel available, and the drive time to surrounding fire battalions. So this project is in a pilot phase, and so far is being completed in California using data provided by the fire battalions. Right now, it's we have some maps from Northern California. So if you click to the next slide, I can show you those. So these show the equipment in Contra Costa County that we've collected data on, and the drive time, which is on the map on the right. and it could show you the distance and time that it would take a fire suppression response to arrive in a given area. Next slide, please. So our second effort we're working on is called the WUI Data Commons. So to think through that framework I just talked to, all those pieces had one thing in common, which is they need adequate, accurate data to properly be able to use all these convenient tools that we've made. So our proposed solution to improve access and quality to wildfire mitigation data is to build what we're calling a WUI Data Commons. This data can come from insurers or communities themselves that have already collected this data, homeowners themselves using inspection technology, or fire chiefs or others who already do inspections. And it can be collected at both the parcel level and the community level. So we're talking about things such as types of roof, if the eaves are enclosed, if there's defensible space, and at a community level, if there's fuel breaks or placement of non-combustible amenities and where the vegetation treatments are. We'll need to allow for appropriate access in the WUI Data Commons in order to maintain homeowner privacy and ensure the aggregation of data is still meaningful enough to be able to be fed into the models. Then it'll be distributed back to various stakeholders to help enhance data accuracy, literacy, and processes of wildfire mitigation improvement and insurance pricing that depends on the data. So this could be a solution to the way that homeowners get back the understanding of maybe why their insurance company is non-renewing them. They'll be able to see their own data and how it's being perceived by an insurance company or how it's being fed into a catastrophe model. Next slide, please. So we have already completed one phase of this project and our second phase is almost complete. The third phase is going to be an actual pilot where we begin to build out the WUI Data Commons for about 50 communities in the Western US, including Arizona, hopefully. During phase one, we did confidential interviews with 5 homeowners insurance companies, 2 reinsurers, 3 catastrophe modelers, and 1 regulator. And they've all addressed that there are significant gaps in crucial wildfire risk data at the structural level and even greater gaps at the community level. Almost all of them said that they would use the data and identified multiple use cases and benefits to having better data. They believe better data would reduce uncertainties around wildfire risk, and insurers said that better data would likely allow them to increase capacity and potentially improve insurance affordability. Many of these entities expressed interest in participating in the pilot, and we have a report and webinar available on this first phase and hopefully the second phase in the next month or so. Next slide, please. So during the second phase, we defined some key use cases for the WUI Data Commons so that we could focus our efforts on these use cases. The first one is improving coordinated community action. So this will allow for communities to be able to prioritize better mitigation actions and have effective messaging to different community members by further understanding their own data. Hopefully that'll inspire better resource allocation and hold residents more accountable in monitoring success as we begin to mitigate. The second one is to feed into the IBHS Wildfire Prepared Home and Wildfire Prepared Neighborhood designations. So if you're not familiar with these designations, they are designations that homeowners can get by performing all the required mitigation measures that IBHS sets, and these are highly recognized by the insurance industry. They're also introducing the Wildfire Prepared Neighborhood designation, which is hopefully going to be released later this year and will be based on fuel management at community perimeters and having fuel breaks. So a whole neighborhood can get a designation that would be hopefully recognized by an insurance company. Having the data available through the WUI data commons lowers the amount of work that IBHS needs to do, which can hopefully speed up the process, allowing for more designations and more recognition of mitigation on the ground. And our third primary use case would be to feed the data into catastrophe models. So this will help improve the accuracy of risk pricing, as many insurers do use catastrophe models to in their pricing. In California, there's a regulation right now that is going to be allowing insurance companies to use catastrophe modeling as long as they have mitigation data included in it. So it'll be vital for them to have the data. And when they use catastrophe models for insurance pricing, it's very important that they have the mitigation data at a scale. So as we talked about, your neighbor's home can change the vulnerability of your own. So if the catastrophe model only takes into account what one home's roof looks like, we don't know the impacts of what the neighborhood looks like and how that might change the pricing. Next slide, please. So this just gives you a little sneak peek on what the phase 3 plan will look like for building out a WUI data commons. So the data collection will be broken into a parcel level and community level. The parcel level will be collected using a process established with the on-the-ground inspection technology. We're currently looking at a few different technology vendors to work with for this, and it'll be heavily supported by the fire services. And for the community level data, we're hoping to build pipelines for publicly available or willing to provide data sources that already exist. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel at all here, but put all the data in a one-stop shop for easy access. All of these selected data will be accumulated, verified, and standardized with the assistance of a company called Oasis, who already has a catastrophe modeling standard and is partnered with a catastrophic Resiliency Council, which is underneath the Institute's company. And so the goal is to complete this for about 50 communities in the Western US, and then we'll obtain feedback on the output from insurers, modelers, and communities. We have already gained the support of the Arizona Fire Chiefs Association, so I'm excited that Arizona will be willing to participate in this effort. And then with our feedback, we'll hopefully be able to lay the groundwork for a full-scale WUI data commons. And I just want to introduce two more oriented efforts with this that we are hoping to be a part of phase 3. Which one is what we're calling mitigation makeovers. And our hope with this is that the fire services will implement mitigation makeovers after an inspection, which will be an opportunity for homeowners to apply and receive outside funding for prioritizing mitigations based on what came out of that inspection. And then the WUI data commons can be updated to reflect that type of data. And it's possible that catastrophe modelers or insurers can calculate the difference in the mitigation efforts before and after it's been implemented, so we could see what the impact is of that. And the second one is what we're calling insurability fairs. So with the assistance of consumer groups and communities, we hope to host fairs such as a college career fair where homeowners can essentially show their resume to insurers and be able to help close that gap of visibility of what's happening on the ground and what insurers can see. So now I've talked to you pretty quickly through all the efforts and philosophy behind what Milliman's work is regarding wildfire solutions and community mitigation and modeling. And I'd like to invite anybody to reach out to me with any additional questions, comments, or potentials for collaboration. You could skip to the next slide. I think there's one more after this too. If this is sent out, there are a bunch of links on a lot of good work that Milliman has done in research. It's also available at our website. If you Google Milliman wildfire, you'll get directed to it. So I appreciate all of you listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Taylor. And does anyone online have any questions for Taylor? Any council members? Thank you. Any council members in the room?
I have a quick question. Hi, Taylor. Thank you so much for your presentation. Sorry if I kind of missed this. Would you be able to share Milliman's like role in this? What kind of, yeah.
Yeah, so Milliman is a consulting firm. So what our clients are insurance companies and catastrophe modelers and departments of insurance and even communities we've worked for, and just providing advice and expertise in solving these type of bigger problems. We've have a lot of partners as well that we can leverage, like fire services, the catastrophe modeler companies that we partner with and kind of do research and studies to help create solutions. We're an actuarial firm, so we provide that actual expertise within the problem.
Has anyone, and this might be a dumb question, taken a look at comparing the models, or is that that's everyone's specific, they all make their own models and no one shares them type thing?
So there is a lot of confidential IP behind the models and what is creating the calculation, as well as the data that's fed into it. So a lot of times catastrophe modelers have their own exposure sets that they use, meaning they calculate the value of the homes and use aerial imagery like Verisk introduced to be able to obtain that data. So there are some things that can be compared, but as far as what's really causing the difference between models, I'm not sure. And maybe even Verisk can speak to if they've ever come across any sort of comparisons, or how they discuss the difference in science that's used underlying the models. But I think it's based on the insurance company and how they use the output of the models.
Thank you, Taylor. Are there any other questions for Taylor? Great presentation. Thank you again. Next, we're going to move on to Eli Russo and Brian Powell from the Center for Insurance Policy and Research, CIPR. And I believe you're online. If you could please introduce yourself.
Okay, can you hear me? Good afternoon.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Elisabetta Russo, and I'm standing in for Jeffrey Tsorkalski. He had a medical emergency with his family, and so he sends his apologies. I'm the Enterprise Risk Management Advisor at the NAC, and I am with Jeff, the co-founder of the NAC Catastrophe Modeling Center of Excellence that the NAC established 3 years ago. Next slide, please. So this is a legal disclaimer that let's move on to the next slide, please. So I will provide a brief overview of the goals of the Catastrophe Center of Excellence. And my colleague Brian Powell, who's also online, will provide an overview of the Resilience Hub that has been established within the Center of Excellence. And then we'll explain how the hub works within the Center of Excellence for catastrophe modeling to achieve common goals to support the regulators. Next slide, please. So you've heard from the previous presenters of Verisk and Milliman that catastrophe models are used heavily by insurance companies to manage their cat risk exposure, and this is why we at the NAC established a Center of Excellence that focuses on catastrophe models. So the models are used in pricing, in risk transfer and reinsurance purchase, They're used to assess the concentration risk of the insurance company and carry out a scenario analysis, but also to assess their capital adequacy and solvency position. And of course, also to do mitigation studies. Next slide, please. So all areas that are very much of interest to the regulators of insurance companies. We have carried out our own mitigation study. Back in 2020, we teamed up with RMS, which is another leading catastrophe model vendor, and IBHS. And using RMS wildfire model, we quantify we did a cost-benefit analysis of implementing structural and vegetation management mitigation strategies in 9 communities across 3 states, California, Oregon, and Colorado. So we got some data from our vendors, and we went on to quantify through a benefit cost ratio the impact of all these different mitigation strategies to structures and vegetation management that we looked at. And you can see on this slide at the bottom, there is the link to the report. It's some 86 pages that hopefully, will be useful to you. And you can access it because they're publicly available. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that 3 years ago, we went on to establishing the Center of Excellence, and we received approval from our members. And the purpose of the Center of Excellence is to provide advice to regulators. So we at the NAC are advisors to regulators. We don't charge for our advice. That's a nice, a nice benefit for regulators. And we wanted to provide state insurance regulators with the necessary technical expertise, the tools, the education, and the research that they need to effectively regulate their markets. Okay, CAT models are heavily used by insurance companies that are supervised by our regulators. However, our regulators don't need to become catastrophe model experts to be able to regulate these insurance companies. That is the philosophy of our Center of Excellence. So since 2022, we have now hired a number of experts like Brian Powell for mitigation. We have we have just recently hired a catastrophe pricing specialist. We have a data analyst that has also industry experience with catastrophe models, and we are in the process of hiring 4 new people. Okay, so we are growing exponentially to help all our regulators in these 3 areas. On to the next slide, please. So when the first thing we did after we established the Center of Excellence was to enhance existing tools that regulators have available for the financial surveillance of their companies and also for the rate reviews. So, and I'll talk about that in a second. But also, we created new knowledge and expertise especially in the field of resilience. This is, we've been focusing on this area since we hired Brian, and I let him introduce in a few minutes a year ago. So we've been heavily investing our time and resources in helping individual states create their own resilience initiatives. Next slide, please. So why the Center of Excellence focuses on advising financial regulators? Because since 1992, when Hurricane Andrew occurred, 10% of the total insolvencies of P&C insurers relate to CAT events. We maintain at the NAC a list of insurance companies that have gone bankrupt. And also we do analysis on, you know, the underlying risks that drove these insolvencies. But if we look at the percentage of insolvencies in the last 5 years, we see that 10% is actually jumps to 61% for insolvencies driven by CAT events. So this is a major concern. So CAT risk is a major concern of insolvency for insurance department, for state insurance departments, okay? So next slide, please. So what we did, we first of all helped the regulators develop specific procedures for the surveillance of CAT exposure of their domestic insurers. The procedures, for those of you that are not familiar with this, they are summarized in big financial handbooks that every single department of insurance uses for the annual financial analysis and for the financial examinations of their domestic insurance companies. So we enhanced the procedures and created specific procedures to help the regulators deep dive on an annual basis, and then when the financial examination takes place every 3 to 5 years, so to deep dive into the CAT exposure of their domestic insurers. In addition, we created new reporting for insurance companies because we wanted, insurance regulators, they needed more data on the CAT risk exposure of their domestic companies. So we created specific repositories into the annual statutory RBC filing, which is the filing that is submitted by every P&C insurance company, in this case, but every insurance company, life and health. But for the P&C insurance companies in particular, we are now asking to provide a quantification, peril by peril, of their model losses. So we have, they have to fill in a repository for hurricane risk, earthquake risk, wildfire, and severe convective storm. But we also created a new repository to collect information on their CAT reinsurance program. And then we developed the procedures to support the use of this data into the financial surveillance of the company. So we went all circle, collected the data and embedded in the surveillance framework already used by financial regulators. What was missing? Providing some foundational knowledge to our regulators of how these models work. So we developed a Catastrophe 101 course, and then we went on to developing an additional course to tailor this course to the needs of the financial regulators. We are in the process of rolling out to all states the targeted training for financial regulators. And we also, as Dr. Borman mentioned, we are providing access to our regulators to the documentation of these catastrophe models, technical documentation. Next slide, please. So we are now, so we have addressed the needs of the financial regulators. So then there is the other group of regulators, those that approve rates. Very important job as well. So we are now currently focusing on developing training and tools for these regulators. Because as you heard from the previous presenters, the models are used to estimate the annual average loss and the risk load portion of the premium. Next slide, please. So Dr. Borman mentioned that she has provided the model documentation for her models to the NAIC, and we are very grateful for that. We act as a repository for all this technical documentation. which is confidential. So we have a dedicated SharePoint and where we collect all these model documentation. So for all these vendors that you see here and for all these perils, and we provide access on a need-to-know basis to our regulators. These are big documents, and our regulators can access them on a need-to-know basis. And then we keep, of course, updating the model documentation when the model provides update. So we have a very strong relationship with all the vendors. They are very important partners to the NAIC and to our members. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned the training. I mentioned the foundational training, CAT 101, that is a level field for all the regulators, financial, rate approval. We have then developed a CAT 201, the next level, which is peril-based. So we have just released our severe convective storm technical training, and we are working on the wildfire and hurricane. But I would say that now we have slightly shifted our focus on more applications. So the 301, the slide looks a little, we've lost the CAT 301 on top of the blue arrow, but we are very much focusing more on the application of this knowledge to financial surveillance, to rate filings, to reinsurance arrangement reviews, and so on. So, for example, one of the jobs I'm doing currently is to help the regulators conduct a deep dive of catastrophe risk exposure during financial examinations. So we are very much involved in helping the regulators apply this knowledge, applies the knowledge that, the knowledge of the model, the knowledge of the use of the model in the context of surveillance of specific companies on the approval of rates. Next slide, please. So, and how do we do this? We are developing questionnaires to help the regulators identify the key questions to ask during a rate review and during a financial examination of the solvency position of a company. Next slide. I'll pass over to my colleague, Brian Powell. I'll be happy to take questions at the end once Brian has finished his part. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me an opportunity to speak to you. Want to introduce to you the Resilience Hub. Now, the Resilience Hub is located, as Ellie mentioned, within the Catastrophe Center of Excellence, which is within the Center for Insurance and Policy Research at the NAIC. The basic structure of the Resilience Hub is that of an engagement team. We physically meet and work with Departments of Insurance and commissioners on their desire to get into mitigation programs or develop some levels of resilience. And we have expertise and tools that we can bring to the table to help them do that. We've worked with a number of states across the country to develop or help develop mitigation programs. And I'll go into some detail on that in a few minutes. And we also coordinate between other partners that perhaps the Departments of Insurance are working with in order to actually help them design and implement these programs. We work to help develop policy. And that goes all the way to conceptualizing whatever policy needs a state has to actually creating drafts of legislation, working to develop a legislative strategy and implement that strategy, and then take it even further once the laws have been passed and maybe assigned to a Department of Insurance. Then we work with the insurance commissioner to establish rules and regulations around the operation to ensure that those laws are put into place. We do offer some consumer education and outreach. We have a number of partners that we work with. IBHS, I know we've mentioned that a number of times today. They're a big partner of ours. We also have folks like FLASH, the Federal Alliance of Safe Homes. They play a big role in developing things like resilience messaging and strategy. We have a number of states that they're working with to carry on beyond the mitigation effort to create a level of a resilient culture within states. And there's a way to do that. And it's been very effective. We did it effectively in the state that I came from. And by the way, I'm actually a former regulator with the Alabama Department of Insurance and came aboard with the NAIC last year. But that's something that we did in Alabama. So we have the framework on how to do that. Smart Home America is another grassroots organization that we work with that helps us do some training and outreach efforts on some of these programs that we help stand up. And we also work on funding avenues, creating some pathways for funds to come into programs to help with mitigation and help with resilience activities. And then, of course, we also look at like emerging technologies and things of that nature to bring to bear to create levels of efficiency within these programs that we work with. Next slide, please. One of the reasons that we wanted to have some level of interaction with departments of insurance, especially around designing and implementing things like mitigation programs, or either some level of designing some resilience culture strategy within a state, is that we wanted to create a level of consistency. So consistency in the approach that our partners would recognize and be able to work with, say for IBHS, working and interacting with them on some type of mitigation program where the IBHS standard is used on those programs. There has to be some level of consistency in the way that the partnerships, the departments of insurance interact with IBHS, especially if you're doing some type of construction work or some level of work where IBHS is going to be responsible for the evaluations and issuing of some type of certification. Another consistency that we really wanted to look at was for insurers in just the industry in general, in that there's consistency across the way that the departments of insurance interact with them in this space, and also standards like with IBHS's standards, how they interact with them. And also it gives us a platform for the NAIC to move within those different partnerships. And we all are kind of on the same page when we're talking about this type of work. Next page, please, or next slide, please. As I mentioned before, IBHS is a big player in this space. There are others for different perils, but we have worked with states to adopt mitigation grant programs using the fortified standard. And as you recall, the fortified standard is a construction standard that addresses high wind, hurricane, and hail. So we've implemented programs across the country where fortified is a standard with that, with those programs, and then also with the wildfire prepared programs. The Wildfire Prepared Home, Home Plus, and then soon to be released will be the neighborhood, the Wildfire Prepared Neighborhood designation program. And we've worked with them to help understand how to not only roll out these programs, but also how that standard would fit into model programs that we've developed at the NAIC. So the big piece of that for us at the Resilience Hub is not the standard for the wildfire prepared program, say, but it's also how does that fit into a mitigation program that must fit within a state government system. So how does a program fit within a Department of Insurance? Who are the partners within the state system? What other agencies are going to be involved? How will money move within the state system? And that's really a tool and expertise that the Resilience Hub brings to departments of insurance when they want to establish these mitigation programs, is that we bring a comprehensive and really an all-inclusive approach to designing programs that are consistent with, say, IBHS or partners, and also consistent with the industry. Next slide, please. So this gives you an idea of the scope or magnitude of work that we have done through the hub. We have in the gray shaded boxes, you will see where we have examples of wind mitigation programs that are either in operation, where legislation that we helped develop and implement have received authority, where the departments have received authority to start those programs, or where they're just really planning the programs. So you see it runs across the pretty much the center to the eastern side of the country. We're also working with states in the western part of the country, and there are a number of them in planning wildfire mitigation grant programs within their departments of insurance. And then we also work with departments that may want to adopt a standard like the fortified or the wildfire prepared home, but then start looking forward to additional programs or additional standards or reaching mitigation or resiliency in homes that are kind of in addition to or will reach a standard at some point through their mitigation program. An example of that is Connecticut's Department of Insurance. They're looking at adopting a fortified program, but they want to have a heavy flood education component to that. Maine, same thing with the fortified program, but they are also looking at tree mitigation since that is such an issue for them up there. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, we have a lot of different ongoing work. It's not just the programs development with through the engagement team, but we also have education opportunities. Ellie mentioned some on the solvency side. We have a few that are being developed right now. One is going to be really a program that's going to help train workforces that enter this space. Whether it's at the insurer level or if it's for departments of insurance, where they're looking for qualified applicants to work on these mitigation programs. We want to be able to provide that support for them, and then also we build and have resources and tools for regulators to use, and we keep those on a couple of different sites. I think maybe Elliot had mentioned that there's SharePoint site that's available for some of the solvency issues. We have some information and tools that are on a SharePoint site as well for regulators. So it's not just the engagement, interacting with the engagement team, but there's also resources that regulators can access digitally and use for references. And we also have been working with FEMA to the extent that we can at this point to address other issues that they're working on and trying to bridge the gap between really disaster recovery and insurance. Next slide, please. Another tool we have a few years ago, we developed this resiliency policy and resource guide, and we've made it available to state insurance regulators. And what it does is it gives a general overview of grant mitigation programs that we're working on. It goes into depth about over building codes, what they mean, how to address building code policy and issues within your state. And then also it gives an overview of what a sustainable retrofit program can look like, and then moving into the culture of resilience using the retrofit programs and building code as kind of a catalyst to do that. Next slide, please. The fires are going to come. The wildfires are going to continue to come, and we're going to have to address those. I think we put this slide in here just to kind of demonstrate that we're seeing a strain on the insurance industry because of these losses, obviously, and we're working to help try to figure out mitigation programs and mitigation applications so we can avoid these losses. I think this was a burn test that we did at a Western Zone meeting a couple of years ago, maybe, and it was conducted by IBHS. It was very impactful, and we hope to replicate this soon. One of the education ventures that we have is through our partnership with IBHS. Is we have a couple of trips a year where we take regulators and we also take legislators to their research facility in Richburg, South Carolina, where they're actually able to see these tests in person and talk with the scientists that are developing the standards and ask them questions about the work that they're doing and what they're gaining through these tests. Next slide, please. This slide just really shows kind of the life cycle of what we do. You'll see that there's a number of things that we can work on with regulators through the CIPR and the CAT COE. One of which is to help with incentives. I may have a slide here in a minute on incentives, but the mitigation discount or premium discounts is a project that we undertake for regulators if there's some type of calculated incentive that a state may want to offer to their citizens, in addition to grants for doing mitigation work. We also do training for departments of insurance on rate filing review. And I don't know how much you know about the rate filings, but it does take some training and skill to be able to go in and review these, especially when you're embedding mitigation discounts and things in there. We want departments of insurance to understand what they're seeing and what they should be looking for. And then also back around to the program enhancements, tracking success. We monitor this. Even programs that are up and standing, we offer kind of ongoing support for them. And then back to our CAT risk assessment and prioritization. This life cycle is something that we use every day, and we keep. This is a way we're able to sustain support for programs that the states have. Next slide, please. Here is an example of some risk exposure maps that we produce. We have a tool where we can layer risks on top of each other and produce not just this map, but there's also some data tables that we also can provide for departments of insurance. Where this comes into play is when we look at mitigation grant programs and how they're distributed through states. So we look at this to try to understand where would be the highest rate of return for insurance departments in investing their grant funds. And this tool is available for all states to use and for all perils. And I think we can do it down to the zip code level, perhaps. But this has been a very valuable tool for departments of insurance that we've been working with to assess where they need to distribute their program and kind of give them some level of priority for investing their funds. Next slide, please. Let's just go to the next slide after this, if you don't mind. So the CAT Center of Excellence, Modeling Center of Excellence, our staff, our contact information is there. This QR code that's shown, you can use that with your camera to access our website. So just want to thank you for the time to present today and for Ellie and I to present. And if you have any questions, please feel free. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. Ellie and Brian, thank you very much. Do any of the council members online first have any questions for Ellie or Brian? Hearing none, do any of the council members in the room have any questions? Feel free.
Yeah, just talk about these standards that we've heard about in our meetings relating to building and building codes. What's I guess your level of interaction with the builders on kind of adoption? Have you seen adoption? Is there, work happening to facilitate those in new construction?
Yes, we've had a lot of interaction with the builders, more particularly the Builders Association, also your code officials, everyone that's really around or lobbying for building codes, either for or against building codes. We have interaction with them, we saw in Alabama, a tremendous, I guess it was a positive movement toward building codes. Once once a population or once consumers understand what this mitigation is for, especially if they're incentivized to do it, you start seeing a lot of take up. You start seeing a lot of interest and demand in it. And that's really what these programs are designed to do. They're designed to, as a platform to work toward gaining stronger building codes if that's feasible in a state. Some states it's just not feasible. But like say in Alabama, for example, we did. Alabama doesn't have a statewide building code, but they have the authority to adopt code jurisdictionally. So we started seeing codes being adopted around or along our highest risk area for wind damage, which was the coast for hurricane. We started seeing jurisdictions adopt building codes there that included the IBHS Fortified Hurricane Standard. When we did that, we started seeing that kind of take off, and other jurisdictions started adopting it. And from that, along with the mitigation grant programs that was in place, the education or the outreach we did, we started seeing a shift in the way that populations were making decisions about resilience. So, for example, the Strengthen Alabama Homes program, which is a mitigation grant program at the Department of Insurance in Alabama, has only issued about 8,000 grants. But there are over 60,000 homes mitigated to the fortified standard in Alabama. So that delta is the growth. That is the adoption of the resilience culture, and that's how we measure that. So yes, we have worked heavily with building code and all players in that space, and use that as a tool to develop a resilient culture in states.
And I noticed for the Strengthen Alabama program that their kind of website talks about how they're not funded with federal money or state money. They're funded by, could you talk about how they're funded?
Yeah, so full disclosure, I'm the one that architected and designed that program and ran it for over a decade. So that's why I can bring some knowledge about that program in particular to you. So the program is funded through legislative action where the Department of Insurance was given authority to use a portion of some of the fees that it collects from the insurance industry to fund the program. And those fees are things like licensing fees for agents. It's for premium tax that they collect. And so a portion of that was given to the program to go back into basically the consumer to mitigate homes, which actually lowered the risk for the insurers. So the insurance companies that were paying these fees were actually reinvesting their money in ways to reduce their risk. So this money did not come from the general fund or any other type of federal or public funding.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you guys very much to all of our presenters today. Very good presentations. At this time, I would like to open it up to all council members. If you have any comments you would like to make, start online first. Laura. Hi there.
I just wanted to say hi. Thank you so much. Laura Curtis with the American Property Casualty Insurance Association. Just want to say thank you to all the presenters. This information is very interesting and very informative, and insurers are always extremely supportive of mitigation, especially at a community-wide level, and seeing how this information is then used is really helpful. So thank you all for your time.
Any other council comments online? Okay. How about in the room? Okay. Well, thank you very much. At this time, we're going to proceed to public comments. And again, if you'd like to make a public comment and have not already done so, please fill out a speaking slip or a Google form to comment. Online comments will be taken after any in-person comments. Online attendees will be able to unmute themselves and turn on their camera. When providing comments, please identify yourself first and who you are representing, if applicable. The council will not be answering any questions during the public comment period, but may request that any matters presented be reviewed by council staff or placed on any upcoming agenda. So at this time, Harry, do we have any one registered for public comment?
No, we do not.
And for
No,
my,
online.
I'm sorry.
No, fine.
And from my perspective, I don't believe we've received any in-person slips for comment. Okay. I believe we don't have any pending public comments. So I will just go right to thanking everyone for their attendance. I think that these meetings are very important and we appreciate your participation. We do have a date for the next meeting, and that will be, it's currently scheduled for June 11th at 1 p.m. And that will be located here as well. There may be a room change in the invitation before the meeting. But other than that, we will continue the discussion around the ground risk and mitigation efforts. So thank you very much, and I will end this meeting.
Thank you.